Hi, folks, and welcome back to The Journey. Here we are in John chapter 6. We're continuing on in John chapter 6. This is episode 7, I guess, or part 7 of our mini-series on John 6 within the greater project of The Journey, which is going through all four Gospels concurrently. We've been comparing the Gospels as we go, but of course the rest of John chapter 6 from here on out is only in John, and so there's really nothing to compare it to, so we'll only be reading John. So we're continuing on now. We just saw Jesus walking on water, and Peter also for a second. And so now this is what happens next. So the first section I want to read for you is my translation of John 6, 22 to 27. Okay, so it goes like this. The next day, the crowd that was still on the other side of the sea could see that there had been only one boat there, and that Jesus had not gone in that boat with his disciples, but that his disciples had gone away without him. Then other boats from Tiberias came near to the place where they ate the bread when the Lord had given thanks. So when the crowd saw that neither Jesus nor his disciples were there, they got into the boats and went to Capernaum looking for Jesus. And when they found him on the other side of the sea, they asked him, "Rabbi, when did you get here?" Jesus answered them, saying, "Truly, truly, I say to you, you seek me not because you saw signs, but because you ate of the loaves and were satisfied. Do not work for the perishable food, but for the food that keeps into eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you. For God the Father has set his seal on him." Okay, so we're going to take that chunk. Now, Jesus and the disciples are now in Capernaum. How did they get there? I believe that the phrase "the other side," in other words, every time it talks about going to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, right? What constitutes the other side from one side is actually defined, I think, by the River Jordan, right? Now, if you look at a map, the Sea of Galilee is kind of divided in two, top to bottom, by the River Jordan. The river comes in at the top, at the north end, and goes out at the bottom. And so if you think of that as a continuous line running through the middle of the Sea of Galilee, right, you can see what the two sides are. Right? So even though these cities that we've been reading about where Jesus and his disciples have been, even though they're all actually kind of close together, all around the bend at the top of the Sea of Galilee, right? Capernaum is west of the Jordan River and Bethsaida is east of it. So you can go to the other side of the sea even if it's a very short trip because you're crossing that line that is the Jordan River. Now, we saw that right before the feeding of the 5,000, Jesus got into a boat and went to the other side. He would have been going east toward Bethsaida. And as we saw, the feeding of the 5,000 was in the area of Bethsaida, right? Now, after the feeding of the 5,000, they go to the other side again, which means now they're heading back toward Capernaum. Now, Mark 6 says that they're going toward Bethsaida. But assuming they were in the region of Bethsaida, and we know they weren't in Bethsaida, they were in the region, assuming they were in the region of Bethsaida, east of Bethsaida, they would still have to go toward Bethsaida to go past it to go on to Capernaum, right? So Mark can still be right that they're going toward Bethsaida, but they're going to go past it toward Capernaum. And in fact, John tells us that they started across the sea toward Capernaum, right? So we saw those in the previous text, right? Now, if you're going by boat, right, and if you would stick by the coast, which is what they would do, you would have gone right past Bethsaida to get to Capernaum. So they went toward Bethsaida, planning to follow the coast around past it, going on toward Capernaum. But they got blown off course into the middle of the sea. And then that's where Jesus walks on water. And then he gets into the boat and the storm stops. And then they arrive at the shore where they were headed, which presumably would be Capernaum. So if you're looking at the map, right, he goes from the west coast to the east coast. Again, though still staying real close to the top. So it's not like across the widest part of the sea at all. He goes from the west coast, west of the Jordan River, to the east coast, east of the Jordan River. There he feeds 5,000. Then on the way back from the east coast to the west coast, he walks on the water. And the people then catch up to him on the west coast in Capernaum, right? But again, all this is still pretty close together because it's all towards the top of the Sea of Galilee. It's just that what I'm calling east and west is east or west of the Jordan River. Now, remember that Capernaum is Jesus' Galilean headquarters. It's where Peter lives with his mother-in-law and where the Zebedees live, right? And so it's where Jesus is making his headquarters in Galilee. His headquarters was not Nazareth, it was Capernaum. So Jesus has simply gone back to his central city in Galilee, his headquarters in the north, which is exactly why the people knew to look for him there. They said, well, he must have gone back to Capernaum. And that's where they go, and they catch up with him in Capernaum. So it's not surprising that they find him. They find him exactly where they would expect him to have gone, which is back to Capernaum, back to where he's making his headquarters. Now, John Chrysostom thinks that the Apostle John has made a point to say this about the crowd, that they knew Jesus hadn't gotten on the boat, because Chrysostom thinks the apostle is telling the reader that Jesus wanted these people to figure out that he had walked on water. In other words, Chrysostom thinks that once people see that he hadn't gone in the boat, then they would immediately reason, well, obviously he walked across the sea. And where Chrysostom goes from there is that the crossing of the Red Sea by the people of Israel in Exodus is a type or a foreshadowing of Jesus crossing the sea by walking on the water. But of course, this miracle, the miracle of Jesus, is an even greater one than the miracle of Exodus, where the people walked on dry land because the sea separated. Well, okay, so I don't know that I buy the idea that these people, the crowd, would just simply intuit that Jesus had walked on water. But at any rate, they do catch up with him. And when they catch up with him, they ask him, when did you get here? Now, I'm not sure why it would matter to them when they got here. It seems to me that what they're really asking is, how did you get here? In other words, I don't think they did instinctively know that Jesus walked on the water. And they were asking, when did you get here, as a polite way of saying, how did you get here? So Jesus answers them not by telling them how or when he got there. He answers them by saying, you seek me, you follow me for the free food, right? Not for the right reasons. And I love St. Augustine's complaint here. Now, when you listen to Augustine, keep in mind that he's writing this around the turn of the 5th century, right? Christianity has only been the official religion of the Roman Empire for about a generation. In fact, Augustine's own baptism comes, I want to say, only like 5 years after the Emperor Theodosius issued the Edict of Thessalonica, which made Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire. That was in the year 381. 386, Augustine gets, converted and baptized. So by the end of the, 4th century there, Christianity hasn't been the official religion of the Roman Empire all that long, but it has been long enough that lots and lots of people are getting baptized for all the wrong reasons, right? You got to figure, here's Augustine thinking, I agonized over this. I studied every possible alternative to Christianity before finally being convinced that I needed to be a Christian, right? And here are all these people who are getting baptized now just because the emperor is a Christian, and it's good for networking, and it's politically correct now, and all the wrong reasons. And so Augustine just hones in on this saying of Jesus, you're following me for all the wrong reasons. And Augustine says, isn't it the case that so many people today are doing the same thing? So I want to read Augustine's quote here. He says, how many seek Jesus for no other objective than to get some kind of temporal benefit? One has a business that has run into problems, and he seeks the intercession of the clergy. Another is oppressed by someone more powerful than himself, and he flies to the church. Another desires intervention with someone over whom he has little influence. One person wants this, and another person wants that. The church is filled with these kinds of people. Jesus is scarcely sought after for his own sake. So that's Augustine. The point is that people are using Jesus as a means to an end, right? And people still do that, though now in very different ways, because obviously now the church doesn't have the kind of influence in society that it had back in Augustine's day. Now the church is more countercultural, so it's not politically correct to be a committed Christian, especially a traditional Orthodox Christian. And so, but people still have different ways of following Jesus for all the wrong reasons, for the free bread. And it's so ironic that some people, and you don't really see this in the Catholic Church as much. You see this more in certain expressions of fundamentalist Protestantism. But it's ironic that some people have turned Christianity into a prosperity gospel in which Jesus supposedly promises material blessings, right? But it would be really hard to actually read the Gospels and believe this. But many do, because they are not reading the Gospels. They're just listening to their popular preacher make promises and tell them what they want to hear. So anyway, back to the original context. The people at the time are thinking about literal bread. They are thrilled that Jesus fed them free bread, and they want more. They got filled today, but they want tomorrow's bread too. They want tomorrow's bread today. They want to put their trust in the confidence that they're just going to keep getting free bread, right? Which is another way of saying they want to put their trust in some kind of material security. But it's just like the manna, which is another type of the feeding of the 5,000, the manna in the wilderness. Remember, except for the Sabbath, they couldn't keep any for the next day. If they tried to keep some for the next day, it went bad. And so it's just like that. The bread Jesus gives, on the one hand, he's going to say it's eternal bread, yes. But on the other hand, it's not the kind of bread that gives you material security, that allows you to just, not worry about like he's just going to keep giving you free bread tomorrow. So it's a little bit of a paradox, right? Because in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said, worry about today, don't worry about tomorrow, right? But that has to do with trusting that Jesus will provide, trusting that God will provide tomorrow, not demanding tomorrow's bread today so that you can hoard it or set it aside or be able to trust in the bread or in your storage or in your bank accounts, right? I think that Jesus, when he teaches the Our Father, and he teaches us to say, give us this day our daily bread, right? I think that's the same message there. Now, of course, there is a possible allusion to the Eucharist in this, the super substantial bread, the daily bread. But the primary meaning there is simply this. We're asking God to provide for our needs, but just for today. We're not asking for tomorrow. Part of the reason why we're not asking for tomorrow is because we plan to pray this prayer again tomorrow, right? And so provide for our needs just for today. But also, we're not asking for tomorrow because keeping to one day at a time forces us to put our trust in God rather than ourselves or our storage barns or our bank accounts, right? Or as Chrysostom says, rather than putting our trust in our own ability to work and make a living, right? So whether you're putting your trust in the confidence you have in your occupation and your ability to continue to make a living, or whether you're putting your trust in having a lot of money in the bank, all of that is a form of putting trust in yourself as opposed to putting trust in God to provide tomorrow what you don't yet have today, right? And so if you worry about tomorrow, you're going to try and fix tomorrow today. You're going to try and settle tomorrow today. And I get it, because this is my personality. My personality is I want to be a set it and forget it kind of guy, right? I want to not worry about this stuff. I want it all done and settled, right? But that leads you to being stressed out all the time because you're always trying to fix tomorrow today. Every day is all about setting up tomorrow. And Jesus knows that's an exercise in futility. You can only trust tomorrow to God and try to be faithful today, to do the right thing in the moment today. This is something I am constantly working on. So I'm not saying this as someone who's achieved perfection in this realm. I'm saying it as someone who knows what it's like to struggle with this, right? The crowd in the story, the crowd is trying to secure their future in a way by following Jesus for free bread, right? If I just follow this guy wherever he goes every day, he'll feed me every day. I won't even have to work for a living, right? Free bread, right? And of course, you know where this is going, right? Jesus says there is something more important, a more important kind of bread. This is the kind of bread that doesn't get used up and it doesn't go bad, so that you need to get more tomorrow. On the other hand, you do need to get it again tomorrow or next week, because you need to trust God to provide in the moment. And then if you go to that layer of meaning where this is a reference to the Eucharist, right? Well, it applies here too. You can't just receive the Eucharist once and say, well, I've now got the eternal bread. Don't need to ever do it again. No, you need to receive the Eucharist regularly, right? And if you don't, you will fall away from Jesus. So, if we were to use the analogy, you got to keep following Jesus for the Eucharist all the time. In John chapter 15, Jesus is going to say that you need to remain in him and he in you, right? Like the branch needs to remain connected to the vine. If the branch is cut off from the vine, doesn't matter if there's already little grapes starting to grow on the branch, they're going to die, right? For the fruit to be produced, the branch needs to stay connected to the vine. Same thing with our lives. We need to stay connected to Jesus Christ, right? So we need to remain in him. Some translations say abide, which has a kind of a combination of remain and live in him, remain in him, but it's the same word, remain. So we need to remain in him and he in us. And then if you were to say, okay, well, Jesus, fair enough, we need to remain connected to you. We need to remain in you and you in us. How do we do that? Jesus is answering that question right here in chapter 6. And so by the time you get to chapter 15, you don't need to ask, how do we do that? You know he's already told you here, right? And so we're going to be unpacking that as we go, but you know where this is going. He's going to say, if you don't eat my flesh and drink my blood, you have no life in you. So the Eucharist is, and by the way, repeated, ongoing, regular reception of the Eucharist is a requirement for salvation because it's how we remain connected to him. It's how the branch remains connected to the vine. It's how we remain in him and he in us. So, as the church fathers like to point out, temporal food makes you live until tomorrow, but then you need more of it. Eternal food makes you live forever. But that doesn't mean that you can only take the Eucharist once and then you're done. Now, before we go on to the next passage, I just want to talk a little bit about this idea of the seal. The Father has set his seal on the Son. This seal is the seal of approval, but it's also the seal of ownership. Now, the Greek could actually imply a divine seal, right? And remember, this is the meaning of what the Father said of the Son at his baptism as well. And so the seal, if you think in terms of the ancient world, you have a signet ring, which instead of like an official signature to sign legal documents, you have a ring with the image of your family crest or name or initials or something on it, and you make an impression in wax. And the impression is the wax is the seal that seals the document closed. And so the impression in the wax is the image of the signet ring, which is the symbol of the authority of the person who has signed off on the document, right? And you can see the same root word in signature and signet ring, right? So you probably knew all that, and you get all that. But what I want to do is make this connection between the concept of the seal and the concept of the image. The seal imprints the image in the secondary media, in the wax, right? And so in the church fathers, and especially I'm thinking of Novatian and then Hilary of Poitiers, who read Novatian and copies a lot of stuff from him, they both connect this to Philippians chapter 2, right? Where Paul says in Philippians 2, he, the Son, was in the form of God, right? That word form there means the same thing as substance, nature, essence. Means that the Son is consubstantial with the Father. He starts out divine, right? And so in a sense, he is the image of the Father, right? And as the image of the Father, he is the seal, or the Father's seal is set on him, and that means he comes with the Father's authority. The seal confirms the authority of the original, right? So in this case, Jesus is the image of the Father, right? And what's implied is that the image is impressed into the wax and imitates the image. And there's this sort of layers of meaning here, because the Son is the image of the Father. We are made in the image of God, and we are made in the image of the Logos of the Son. And so it's almost like we're a copy of a copy. And so you could make the argument that like we're like the wax, that Jesus needs to be pressed into us so that we can conform to his image and imitate him. But the point in the passage here is that the Son comes with the Father's authority, and when the Father says, "I have set my seal on him," that is, the Father confirming his authority in the Son. Another way, maybe an easier way to say all this, is that Jesus is the face of God. He's the image of the Father in which we are made. He's consubstantial with the Father in his divine nature, but he's consubstantial with us in his human nature, right? And because of his incarnation, his divinity glorifies his humanity, which makes it possible for the glorification of our humanity. But again, the point of all this is that the Son comes with the Father's authority, like having his signet ring, like having the official seal. And this is why we should believe what he says, right? That's the point that Jesus is sort of making here. You should believe what he says and believe in who he is, right? Because he comes with the Father's authority, and that's why we should trust him for matters related to our salvation. He has the authority of the Father as, in a way, the face of the Father, or the face of God on earth. Okay, so far so good. Now, let's read the next bit of text. This is, again, John 6, obviously, verses 28 to 34. So then they asked him, "What can we do to do the works of God?" Now, just as an aside, this is a really interesting question, right? Because Jesus has just criticized them, right? You're following me because of the free bread. Don't look for the temporal bread. Look for the eternal bread. And by the way, I come with the Father's authority. It's almost like at this point they're willing to say, "Okay, we're in, right? We accept that. Okay, then now what do we do? What can we do to do the works of God?" All right, so let me start that again. So then they asked him, "What can we do to do the works of God?" Jesus answered by saying to them, "This is the work of God, that you believe in the one whom he sent." So they said to him, "Then what sign will you do that we might see? What work will you do so that we might believe you? Our ancestors ate manna in the desert. As it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat." So Jesus said to them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, Moses didn't give you the bread from heaven, but my Father gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is the one who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world." So they said to him, "Lord, give us this bread always." Okay, so the people respond to Jesus directing them to eternal bread. They respond with, "Okay, well, what do we have to do to get this bread?" In their minds, right, they were hoping for free bread, for temporal bread. But, okay, if it's eternal bread we're talking about, obviously that can't be free. We must have to do something. There must be some work we have to do to get that eternal bread. So they say, "Okay, Jesus, drop the other shoe. What do we have to do?" And Jesus' answer, right, if we look at it closely, might surprise us, especially those of us who are Protestant or former Protestants like I am, or Protestants, because from the Protestant sort of sola fide mindset, you would expect Jesus to say, "Oh, no, it's not about works. You don't have to do any works." But he doesn't say that. He says, "This is the work," right? And here, work of God should probably be read as godly work, right? It's work of God doesn't mean the work that God does, but the work that God wants us to do to, I suppose, follow Jesus, right? What is the work what is the godly work? What is the work that God wants us to do to be doing God's will, right? And, okay, so as it turns out, the work is to believe. Believe in the one whom the Father sent. Believe in the Son. Now, notice, though, it's not faith versus works. The faith is the work. Faith is the work. And of all the church fathers, it's actually Augustine who points this out. He says, Jesus did not wish to separate faith from work, but he said that faith itself is a work. St. Augustine said that, right? Okay, so then they ask for a sign, right? Jesus says, "Well, I'll tell you what the work of God is. Believe in the one whom God sent," right? Jesus is referring to himself. And then, so what do? They say, "Okay, prove it. Prove that the one whom God sent is you. Prove that we should believe in you," right? And again, we get this this idea that the manna in the desert is a foreshadowing, right? Even the crowd refers to it. It's a foreshadowing of the feeding of the 5,000, and maybe they even get that. But what's more important is it's a foreshadowing of the Eucharist. It's a type of the Eucharist. It's also a foreshadowing of the incarnation itself, because in the Old Testament, the manna came down from heaven, right? But it was only for one nation. Christ came down, but he was for the whole world. And so this is where we read it in Philippians 2, and we read it in the Creed, that language of he came down, that is a direct reference to the manna in the wilderness. But the manna was that temporal bread that only saves you until tomorrow, saves you from dying of starvation today, saves you until tomorrow, right? But the incarnation in which Jesus came down, he is the eternal bread. And then, of course, he's going to give us that bread regularly in the Eucharist, right? Now, a lot of translations render this like this. For the bread of heaven is the bread that comes down from heaven. And, check your New Testament, see if yours says something. For the bread of heaven is the bread that comes down from heaven, or the bread of heaven is that which comes down from heaven. But that's just redundant. It can't possibly mean that, right? I think the Greek actually should be rendered into English this way. For the bread of heaven is the one who comes down from heaven. Not the bread of heaven is that which comes down from heaven, but the bread of heaven is the one who comes down from heaven, i.e. Jesus Christ, right? Who is the one who came down from heaven? Philippians 2, he came down. And he's, in case there's any question, he's about to make it very clear when he says, I am the bread of heaven, right? So this is the godly work that's expected of us. The Father is the sender, the Son is the messenger. The Son comes with the Father's authority. So believe in the messenger, not simply in his message, but also in who he is, that he is the Son of the Father, and that he actually comes from the Father with the Father's authority. Now, incidentally, the birth of Jesus, which is not exactly the incarnation, because the incarnation, the moment of incarnation, is Jesus' conception, which happened in Nazareth. But the birth of Jesus took place in a place called Bethlehem. And the name Bethlehem means house of bread. Beit Lechem, house of bread. And as Eusebius points out, nobody else famous was ever born in Bethlehem, right? And yet there are these prophecies about the Messiah being born in Bethlehem. Couldn't be anybody else. And if you go to Bethlehem, you can see the place where Jesus was born, which you already could. It was already a pilgrimage destination in Eusebius's day, because St. Helena had gone there and found it, and the Emperor Constantine had poured money into it to make it a site of holy ground, a site of pilgrimage. So Eusebius's point here is that God has obviously providentially made the town of Bethlehem be called the house of bread, because the bread of heaven would come down there or be born there. So anyway, okay. So the people, the crowd, they seem to be willing to agree at this point. Okay, if the work we have to do to receive this eternal bread is believe in you, okay, they seem ready to believe. They say, all right, then give us this bread always. By asking Jesus for the eternal bread, they're stating their faith that he has the authority to give it. So, okay, give us this bread always, right? And St. Augustine points out how this parallels chapter 4, the woman at the well. Jesus promised her eternal water, and she said, "Sir, give me this water." So she's also ready to believe that he has the authority to give this water, right? So the people are ready to say yes to Jesus to get the eternal bread. But spoiler alert, there's going to be another thing they will need to do. That is, they're going to actually need to eat this bread, and that's going to be a stumbling block for them. And that's where we'll stop for today, and we'll pick up next time. Thanks for listening.